Hello again. The destruction of British history and culture has been accelerating in the last 3 or 4 years, to the point that advertisements for historical exhibitions or plays at the National Theatre and so on are utterly different from the way which they were 5 years ago, say in 2019, before the COVID epidemic. The thumbnail to this video, for instance, shows the National Theatre's production of Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest. It will be observed that of the 5 characters shown in the play, which was first performed in 1895, only 2 are white and 40% of the cast are black women. Even today, this would be grossly disproportionate. Black people make up just 4 or 5% of the population, which means that only about 2% of the British population are actually black women. This is not colourblind casting, but a quite deliberate attempt to make a play set in Victorian Britain look as though half the people at that time were black. In the description to this video, I give a link which leads to another good example of this process. An exhibition at the National Library of Scotland is running until April. It is called Renaissance, Scotland and Europe, 1480 to 1630. Click on the link and you will see a black woman wearing what one supposes to be medieval or Tudor clothes. She's used to advertise the exhibition. No other figures, just this single black woman. The aim of all this is simple enough. Very few young people gain their knowledge of the past from reading non-fiction books. They are rather digital natives who find out about the world from the internet. Textbooks are no longer supplied to children in most state schools. Everything is online. If school children read books and took the trouble to examine old pictures and so on, then they would soon realise that until a few decades ago this country was ethnically homogeneous, almost 100% white in fact. By flooding the internet and manipulating the images published in various ways, we are reaching the point where Googling any period in English history or plays set in those times, say Tudor times, the 18th century, Victorian period and so on, will bring up images where black people are predominant. It is in this way that we can tell that there is some overarching plan behind this business and can be sure that it is not just something random and innocuous. There have always been tiny numbers of people of different ethnicities other than white European living in this country. In Victorian Britain, there were certainly a few black people, along with sailors from what is now Bangladesh, Hindus from India, and Chinese people as well, Arabs and so on. The same is true of the 18th century, 17th century and so on. It will be observed, though, that these other ethnicities are not being shown in our history. The publicity photograph for The Importance of Being Earnest is what we are becoming familiar with. We've been groomed, as you might say, to accept. Out of a group of 5 people, 2 are black women. We take this as the norm. It would be really surprising if instead of 2 black women we saw Chinese women or Indian women. There were almost certainly more Chinese people and Indians in Britain in the late 19th century than there were black people, but these are not the people we are being conditioned to think of and accept at that time. The same applies to that exhibition at the National Library of Scotland. Of course, it is a black woman shown. There were a few Indian people in Scotland in those days, but you wouldn't expect to see an Indian or Chinese person being used to advertise the thing. It had to be a black person. The reason is, as I say in the title to this video, this is an African colonisation of British history and culture. The images being misleadingly inserted are almost invariably black people, rather than members of any other ethnicity. Ultimately, we will forget about the Lascar sailors, the Hindu peddlers, and the Chinese community in London's Limehouse district, and our history will only contain large numbers of people of African heritage. Why this is happening is certainly open to debate. That it is happening is not.